Lutzkanov, yeah. He will find his papers. So please have a seat here. Yes, and I will only say a few words because we have started late, and so please, dear friends, excuse us. So we have been asked to finish at 5:20 as the latest. So I will try to somehow to coordinate it. Anyway, we will start right now with the with the paper of Jordan Lutzkanov.
Yes, Lutzkanov.
Lutzkanov. It is called The Bulgarian Cultural Identity as Borderline 1, and Jordan is from the Institute for Literature, Bulgarian Academy of Sciences from Sofia, Bulgaria, and so on. Please, Jordan, start with your paper. Yes, I take this one. Okay.
Thank you very much. I'll be reading in order to be quicker. Do you hear me? Okay. Bulgarian cultural identity as a borderline 1. Let me introduce with a brief exercise in ontology. What is borderline? How to discriminate it from in-between, marginal, hybrid, composite. The differences are subtle. Skipping an exercise in ontology, I would try to define borderline as follows. Still not or already not in between. Doubly or multiply marginal, but probably capable of achieving a balanced existence between centers. Potentially hybrid. Potentially composite. Aren't all identities borderline in some respect or another, on some scale or another? If yes, then what makes it reasonable to speak of some identities as of borderline and of others not? Maybe their self-awareness is a sufficient reason. Let me chart the phenomenology of Bulgarian borderline self-awareness. In the last century or more, Bulgarian scholars, thinkers, and writers have expressed a notion of Bulgarian borderlineness, in-betweenness, marginality, and hybridity several times. The recurrent theme of all these four neighboring notions has been Bulgarian deficient Europeanness, or Bulgarian belonging to both East and West, or Bulgarian condition between the West and the East, or lastly, Bulgarian situation at the border between the West and the East. These notions, with the exception of the notion of marginality, have given birth to the popular metaphors of crossroad and bridge, both being shared by probably all Balkan communities. National communities, I mean. While expressing the notions of deficient Europeanness and of Eastern Westernness, Bulgarian self-identification discourse posed the following self-recommendations. First, Bulgarians should adopt the stance of conscious and even selective Europeanization in order to preserve the riches of the people's soul and to stimulate and culturalize its creativity. Second, Bulgarians should abandon their Oriental habits but foster their Slavonic sensibility and antiquity-rooted Balkan collective unconsciousness in order to enrich all human, in fact European, culture. I find these common traits and common musts of Bulgarian self-identification and self-instruction conceptually deficient, and therefore not worthy of being reproduced and scrutinized in my paper. But I shall point at what I think are their major deficiencies before proceeding to self-identifications that have been less influential but are more heuristic. These deficiencies are, first, non-questioning the metahistoricity of a nation and national identity. Second, non-questioning the metahistoricity of a European culture, civilization, and identity. Third, non-questioning the existence of one single center of civilization and culturalization in the world. And fourth, overestimating language as a factor of collective identity. In the last 2 decades, the mainstream debate in Bulgaria, especially in the studies of modernity, has focused on the issue of the primordiality, or to the opposite, the modern constructedness of the nation. Medievalists, and especially Byzantinists, have contributed more to question the rest of the conceptual tenets of Eurocentrism, cultural historical monism, and linguocentrism, which I think have to be viewed together with nation-centrism and questioned jointly, for all these 4 of them form the aspects of one paradigm. So we have a number of epistemologically non-deficient attempts to view the Bulgarian identity as borderline. These attempts can be memorized through the following key phrases: periphery as universe, circles of identity and Byzantinism, second, Romaic proto-nation, Israel and Judea, postmodern attitude to marriage in 10th century Bulgaria, inter-civilizational adaptation and conversions between Christianity and Islam. The 7th, agents of Russian despotism and petit bourgeois. And the 8th, maybe, are we one nation? Okay, I will attend only to some of these identity projects and identity sub-discourses. I should mention that I'm outlining a number of scholarly pronouncements for their theoretical and epistemic heroism. I'm not discussing their scholarly trustworthiness in the narrow sense of the word scholarly. Periphery as universe was introduced by the young scholar of early Middle Ages, Tsvetelin Stepanov, in an article under the same title published in Byzantino-Slavica in 1998. Stepanov meant that till the mid-9th century, the Bulgarian state, being a close neighbor of Byzantium, had belonged to a cultural world that is different from the Roman, Byzantine, or Mediterranean. It had belonged to the oikumene of the Eurasian steppe, gravitating towards the figure of the steppe emperor, namely the Kagan. Later, Stepanov made a comparative examination of 4 steppe powers: Bulgars, Khazars, Turks, and Uyghurs, in their conflict and interaction with the sedentary civilization of the south, Byzantine, Arab, Iranic, Chinese, and outlined the peculiarity of the Bulgarian case. Bulgars were the only to constantly and consistently use the script and afterwards to adopt the fate of their main sedentary enemy, the Christianity of Byzantium. Bulgars had invaded and populated a territory spanning along and across the boundary of East Roman oikumene, Lower Danube. Then, in later articles, Stepanov succeeded to show that after adopting Christianity, for more than 3 centuries, Bulgarian state and Bulgarian elite, both lay and ecclesiastic, maintained a double identity or a double legitimation perspective of a steppe power aspiring to be the steppe empire and of a Christian tsardom aspiring to be the Christian empire, namely an embodiment of its western half, of the western half of the empire of Eastern Romans. So, skipping some other aspects of Stepanov's research, we can conclude that borderline identity, a term explicitly used by Stepanov, characterized medieval Bulgarian society on various levels. Romaic protonation. The concept of Romaic protonation was introduced by the Belgian scholar of early Bulgarian modernity, Raymond Detresse. According to Detresse, the emergence of Romaic or Eastern Roman multi-ethnic nation to comprise all the Orthodox subjects of the Ottoman Empire had been underway until the 1830s, when the birth of Greek laic nationalism caused a ripple effect that destroyed it and led to the formation of mono-ethnic nations on the Balkans. A notable representative of 19th century Balkan poetry, Grigor Perlichev, was seen by Detresse as belonging basically to the Romaic protonation and deliberating between different identities, Romaic, Greek, and Bulgarian, before finally switching to Bulgarian. Are we one nation? A recent article by Mumun Isov contests the idealizing or politically correct views on Christian Islamic cultural convergence in Bulgaria. Isov departs from Ernest Gellner's statement that 2 individuals belong to one and the same nation only if they recognize each other as belonging to it. The article is relevant to my topic in several aspects. Thus, it imparts the idea that Bulgarian nationalism is still on the threshold of becoming non-ethnic or civic, to comprise Bulgarian Turks, beside Bulgarians, and so on. To summarize, contemporary Bulgarian scholarship is most willing to speak of Bulgarian identity's borderline status when discussing 2 historical periods: early Middle Ages up till the 12th century and the period of Ottoman rule, 15th, 19th centuries. The conceptual tenets of nation-centrism, Eurocentrism, cultural historical monism, and linguocentrism were questioned not only in the last 2 decades, but also earlier in the 20th century, in the interwar period. Interwar conceptual oscillations around the notion of Bulgarian borderliness could be associated to the following catchphrases: Paris or Jerusalem, Sasanian Iran on Lower Danube, Hellas and Byzantium, the expressionism of East Christian mural art, Bulgarian soul is tricontinental or trimaternal. The Bulgarian spirit of negation, and Bulgarian means mismatched. I will attend now to only two of them, Paris or Jerusalem. In his memoirs, published in 1923, Mikhail Magyarov witnessed a shift from what we may call post-Byzantine identity to a modern Eurocentric one, as well as an oscillation between them. Quotation. Here they are, still fresh in my memory, the assiduousness and piety with which the old Bulgarian men and women went to Jerusalem to bow to Lord's grave. Nowadays, some are thirsty for Vienna, Paris, Berlin, whereas others for the East, for Tsarigrad or Constantinople, for Alexandria, for Jerusalem. Some want to see the Paris Opera, whereas others Golgotha and Mount Eleon. I do not know who are more right, but I would scorn neither the former nor the latter. End of quotation. If we try to reformulate, Magyarov witnessed a shift from a Bulgarian ethnic belonging within the Romaic oikumene to a Bulgarian national identity within a worldwide Europe of nations. The fact that the memoirist can speak of both without renouncing any of them testifies to a kind of intermediary, bivalent, or borderline stance between those identities, a stance which had been evidently experienced by the early 1920s. Hellas and Byzantium. In 1986, Bogdan Filov, art historian and archaeologist, launched the idea of two Europes, one having as its classical cultural heritage Hellas, and the other Byzantium. I want to stress that Filov was very far from reviewing Byzantine heritage as inferior. Neither was he close to Russian pan-Slavist and pan-Orthodox projects. He implicitly applied this idea in his works on modern Bulgarian painting, claiming, in fact, its borderline stance and requiring from it to maintain this borderline stance. According to him, Bulgarian pictorial arts had to develop, exploiting the aesthetic compatibility between East Christian or Byzantine artistic canon and European post-impressionism. A view quite similar to this can be traced in the works of the late 20th century art historian Dimitar Avramov. Unfortunately, interwar literary historians and critics were not able to articulate an analogical awareness. Let me summarize. To exist reflectively on a border means to understand identity as potentially plural, potentially hybrid, and potentially forgeable. This borderline awareness has, in my opinion, a correlate from the realm of artistic styles. The aptitude to co-employ a number of other styles to form a compound whole, which Jakob Burckhardt long ago called a spatial style, spatial from space. In order to understand how understanding culture as plural, works in the case of Bulgarian self-representations, we had to reduce the phenomenology of borderline awareness to 3 moments, 2 historical and 1 theoretical. First, the notion of plurality could only come to existence when modernization became able of critical self-reflection. That which had been conceived as raw material, nature subject to modernization, became to be conceived as another, a different culture, with a center of reason of its own. In the Bulgarian case, this happened in the memoir, historiography, and culture philosophic discourses of the 1920s. Second, the mentioned notion has been reinforced by the end of the 21st century, the beginning of the 21st century, when awareness was attained about the more or less universal span of the cultural identity's plurality. Plurality is no more conceived as an exceptional, or close to such, peculiarity of Bulgarian cultural identity. I'm sorry, but in my examples here, this is not evident. I skipped the relevant examples for this last statement. Third, we should abstain from thinking that all cultural pluralities are alike. That is, I maintain that the plurality of French, Latvian, and Bulgarian identity is different. Not only because the components within each of these 3 cases are different. The adequate calibration of our view is the main issue here. We have to reinforce our awareness of cultural regions, and if you wish, civilizations and sub-civilizations. We ought to understand that mankind and world history are no less imaginary constructs than Europe and nations. I'm concluding. My brief account can impart the impression that borderliness of Bulgarian identity, from being a matter of conception by academic and non-academic intellectuals either, has become a realm solely of academic study. That borderliness of Bulgarian identity has come to be seen, when seen at all, as past. That 20th century Bulgarian high culture failed to forge borderline, bivalent, or spatial, intellectual and artistic styles. Indeed, modernism and avant-garde in Bulgarian painting fluctuated between moderate domestication of European post-impressionisms and the Byzantine pictorial tradition. And recently, an intellectually empathic academic reconstruction of Byzantine philosophy was performed in Bulgaria. But these are insufficient examples. The growing preoccupation with Balkan studies in Bulgaria adds to my feeble hope. Thank you very much for your patience and attention.
So we will go on, and now the next speaker is Lule Epner. She is my longtime colleague from the University of Tartu. Now she works also at the same time at Tallinn University. She's the founder of theatrical and drama studies at the University of Tartu. Yes, please. Lule's title is The Border State 20 Years After. So please.
Dear colleagues, I'd like to begin by looking back at the most translated Estonian novel of the 1990s, Tõnu Õnnepalus Border State, originally published under the pen name of Emil Tode. In this novel, the unnamed narrator from a poor Eastern European country travels to Paris for the first time. He enjoys the comforts of a Western welfare state, experiencing ambivalent feelings of desire and repulsion, while his attitude towards his homeland is likewise ambivalent. The title of the book has become a popular symbol for post-Soviet Estonia as a zone where East and West meet. It is noteworthy that Õnnepalu's image meant lying at the margin rather than in between. With restoration of independence, Estonia, the westernmost republic of Soviet Union, turned into the easternmost state of Europe. 20 years after, Estonia, who has joined the European Union and the NATO and adopted the euro, is widely regarded as an exemplary case of successful integration with Europe. The other side of the coin is that Estonia, as a part of Europe, is subjected to global processes such as increasing worker mobility, massive migration, rise of multiculturalism, etc., that are about to destabilize traditional cultural and national identities. In my paper, I will address the issue of representation of new identity patterns in contemporary Estonian theatre and literature, and in particular, how the global changes have affected perception and understanding of so-called Europeanness. I will take as examples two novels and two stage productions from recent times. Hanuman's Journey to Lolland and A Handful of Dust by Andrei Ivanov, and Three Kingdoms and Ilona Rosetta Sioux, directed by Sebastian Nübling in Theatre No 99 with international casts, I mean Estonian, German, English actors. My colleague Anneli Kõvamees just gave a paper about Andrei Ivanov in previous session, but I hope I will not repeat her too much. As their names indicate, neither Ivanov nor Nübling are ethnic Estonians. This fact is actually part of the issue to be examined. Both authors, as well as their works, have generated debates on their belonging or not belonging to Estonian culture. As regards Ivanov, he is an Estonian Russian born in Tallinn. He started his literary career after he returned from Scandinavia, where he spent about 7 years. Ivanov writes in Russian, but curiously enough, A Handful of Dust was translated into Estonian from manuscript, but never published in Russian. As a sad consequence, this brilliant novel was not nominated for any literary award of the Estonian Cultural Endowment. It literally fell between the available categories. And let me remark that critics in Russia consider Ivanov's work not Russian literature, but Euro literature. In the field of theatre, where guest directors from abroad have been accepted and awarded since long ago, the stage productions by German director Nübling, distinguished by their multinational cast and mere babble of languages spoken on stage. And so, during the meetings of the jury of Annual Theatre Awards 2013, some members regarded Nübling's work as not Estonian theatre because of language, but maybe even more importantly, because of foreign German artistic style. These kinds of works by authors who live and/or work across national and cultural borders are likely to face the risk of becoming badly visible if not invisible, on Estonian cultural scene. But let us now turn to the texts. Hanomann's Journey to Lolland, as you can see, translated into German, and there is also a stage production directed by Estonian director. Hanomann's Journey to Lolland is to some extent based on the author's personal life experience. The novel, like Border State of Õnnepalu, tells about the journey, but one of completely different kind. The first-person narrator, a Russian from Estonia, is an illegal immigrant who travels around Denmark along with his Indian friend Hanuman. The name refers to monkey god in the Hindu epic. At times, they stay in refugee camps. Episodic structure likens Hanumann's journey to a picaresque novel, but unlike this genre, Ivanov's work is predominantly dreary and depressive. The narrator lives under a false name since he needs to conceal his identity for some reason. And interestingly, the title of the novel masks the true hero of the story too. It is not the narrator, but Hanuman, who dreams of Lolland, an island of Denmark, supposed to be a paradise full of wine and girls. Narrator identifies himself by his country of origin, particularly by his hometown Tallinn, and suffers because he can't talk about Tallinn to anyone. So, as an illegal immigrant, he is deprived of name and home that form the basis of his self-image. In Denmark, he is also outcast from society as having, I quote, neither residence permit, nor identification code, nor bank account. The narrator is mostly on the move, drifting from place to place, but since this journey without destination changes nothing in his life, the predominant impression is that of standstill. A wide variety of refugees and asylum seekers he meets on his journey, including people from former Eastern Bloc, remain in the state of frozen transience. I quote Zygmunt Bauman here, just like himself. Everything in their life is permanently temporary. Their identity is essentially defined in negative terms. To quote Bauman once again, stateless, placeless, functionless, and paperless refugees are considered as the very embodiment of human waste. In quite the same vein, Ivanov's narrator calls refugees, including himself, nature's leftover. Hanumann's journey represents identity loss as a consequence of global processes people are unable to control. Things look a bit different in Ivanov's next novel, A Handful of Dust. The title refers to a line from T.S. Eliot's poem, The Waste Land. Its first-person narrator, a Russian, returns to Tallinn after many years in Scandinavia and tries to settle down. He gets a job in a corporation run by Swedes. Some of his fellow workers are Estonians, some are Russians. However, Ivanov's protagonist keeps feeling foreign in this multinational milieu. He holds an alien's or so-called grey passport, not because of compulsion, but because of deliberate choice to leave his citizenship unidentified. He is a non-belonger. He refuses to identify with any of the categories available in Estonia, Estonian Russian or Estonian Russian, since he perceives national identity as a restrictive obligation or even burden. For instance, the novel includes a highly ironic to-do list for an Estonian Russian. He or she is expected to attend Russian drama theater in Tallinn, to show enthusiasm for Russian culture, to meet New Year at 11 o'clock by Moscow time, to rail against Estonian laws, and so on and so forth. But assimilation into Estonian culture is not an acceptable alternative either. But what about European identity? Compared to Hanuman's journey, which described the Western world from the viewpoint of an East European outsider, a handful of dust offers an inverse perspective. Since the narrator has spent years in Northern Europe, he looks at Estonian life from a kind of West European standpoint. And he admits that Tšuhnaas, this is belittling slang name for Estonians, have rapidly turned into decent Europeans. He exclaims, "Europe is now your homeland. Now everywhere you go, there is Europe." But he also sees how zealous Europeanization effaces cultural differences. They think that something has changed when they drive a Peugeot with a prince in their teeth, a hamburger in one hand, a Coca-Cola in the other. And please note you and they as marks of distancing himself from Estonians. But things look a bit different again when viewed from the perspective of a native West European. I now turn to Three Kingdoms, collaboration of three theatres, text by British playwright, directed by German director, designed by Estonian scenographer. This depicts a journey again, but in opposite direction as compared to Hanuman's journey. Its starting point is in the heart of old Europe, and it ends in Estonia. Three Kingdoms employs the format of a crime story. The British detective investigates the brutal murder of the Baltic Russian prostitute who is likely to be victim of human trafficking. To track down criminals, he needs to travel to Germany and eventually to Estonia. The further he travels from home, the stranger the surrounding world becomes, and the less he understands what is going on. And so, simple crime story turns into anthropological allegory, in the words of a German critic. Cleaners in green uniforms and moving in slow motion form the background for scenes in Germany. Further, Baltic prostitutes appear on stage wearing deer head masks, like dumb animals deprived of individual identity. In contrast, Estonian male gang members appear in overhead wolf masks, which connote aggressiveness and also man is a wolf to man moral. Theatrical images like these show Eastern Europe as a wild foreign land. Indeed, Three Kingdoms was featured as a journey into the subconscious of Europe, and a German critic called the detective's final trip to Tallinn a journey to the heart of darkness. So Estonia is perceived rather as a furthest periphery of Western civilization where uncanny things can happen than genuine part of the common European home. Actually, bleak and even sterile setting creates an image of such a common home where nobody actually feels at home. The actors speak English, German, Estonian, and Russian on stage. Subtitles provide translation for the audiences. As to the characters of the play, this leads to a lot of miscommunication between them, and ultimately they fail to find a common languages. I want to stress here that Nöbling intentionally uses cultural stereotypes and cliches as stereotypes, overemphasizing, even parodying, to point out cultural clashes as well as unexpected similarities and to dislocate habitual identities. Another stage production of Nöbling, Ilona Rosetta Sue, again collaboration of three theaters, is loosely based on three films: Finnish film Drifting Clouds by Agi Kaurismägi, French-Belgian Rosetta by Dardenne Brothers, and American film by Israeli director Kolak Sue. The focus is on the issue of unemployment. This is present in all three films, and also on human loneliness. Differently from Three Kingdoms, Nübling uses here cross-casting in terms of ethnicity. And here's a cast. And one most conspicuous example is Ilona, a Finnish character. The role played by a blonde Finnish actress in Kaurismägi's film is performed by a black woman from Congo in the production. The linguistic palette includes English, German, French, Estonian. In addition, a Congo actress occasionally speaks her native language, Lingala. However, using multilingual and multinational casts, Nübling does not intend to celebrate Europe's cultural diversity. Quite the contrary. These are global market forces that define characters' identity, that of unemployed person, and their relationships in the first place. The idea of Europeanness here refers to shared economic pressures rather than on shared cultural or ethical values. Ilona Rosetta Sue is about transnational melancholy, suggests the German critic. And now I come to some conclusions. Identity formation in contemporary world is strongly affected by opposite but intertwined processes of globalization and individualization or sharpening of differences. Identities have increasingly become fluid and fragmented, and more often than not felt as sites of ambivalence. The works I discussed in my paper represent to a certain extent new patterns of identity as described by Zygmunt Bauman. Andrei Ivanov's anti-heroes could be vagabonds in the sense of Bauman, rootless travelers, strangers wherever they go, never settle down, but always out of place. Such rootlessness is surely not exclusively a problem of Baltic Russians, but concerns also large masses of immigrants, refugees, unemployed people. This is the semicide of free movement of workers in a Europe of open borders. In contrast, a British detective in Three Kingdoms can be seen as a tourist, though an involuntary one, who moves on purpose and in whose world the strange is expected to be domesticated. However, it was not in this particular production. But one key feature of the works discussed above is that they do not offer identity models that could be easily accepted, but instead highlight problems related to formation and perception of identities. One problem is the emergence of transnational European identity, promoted by the ongoing project of European integration. Both Ivanov in his novels and Nübling in his stage productions are critical of the idea of Europe or Europeanness. Ivanov's hero prefers to position himself in a gray zone between different identities. As German critic Christian Rakow observes, Nübling's Three Kingdoms takes a critical look at Europe, whose self-definition relies primarily on the free movement of persons and goods. It creates this production image of Europe without shared meanings nor ethical conscience. The same is true of Ilona Rosetta Sue. Be it reproduction of old colonial stereotypes of the Wild East, or cultural unification or failure to create a community of shared values, all this evidences the crisis of European identity. And lastly, what has happened to border state, I mean novel, 20 years after? I think that the importance of Õnne Palu's novel has not diminished with time. True, Estonia now has joined European community, but I believe many of Estonians still consider themselves living on the borders and experience quite ambivalent feelings towards Europe. Thank you.
Thank you. And now another Estonian colleague. She's Anneli Saro, the current chair professor of theatrical studies of the University of Tartu. The topic is language on the stage, questions of identity, ideology, and morality. So please.
So, hello, everybody. So actually, I'm continuing mostly in the same line as my Estonian colleagues have done already, so tackling quite similar topics. But first, I would like to tell you a story, personal story. When I went to school, I was taught that when one is using the word Estonian as an adjective in front of the items which refer to the state or territory, the word Estonia or Latvia should be written in a capital letter, like in English also. And whenever the issue or object is related to culture or language, the adjective Estonian should be written in small letter. So in Estonian language, and I don't know, maybe also in Latvia, you don't have the problem. Whenever you start writing about Estonian literature or Estonian theatre, you have to think, are you referring to the national literature or to the literature and the culture done in Estonian territory or by Estonians? And nowadays I have to tell you that most of the language editor, they recommend to use all the time Estonian literature or Estonian theatre with capital letter because it's politically correct. So actually what I'm doing here is also I am preaching gap between Estonia with small letter and Estonian with capital letter, or like cultural issues. So it's not so easy for me to accept this new language rule that whenever we talk local culture, it should be referring to the territory or the state. Language used on the stage always bears certain connotation to the identity, ideology, and morality of characters, theatre makers, and audiences. In my paper, I'm going to analyze how different languages, dialects, and other sub-languages have been used or represented in Estonian theatre and theatre histories, drawing parallels with Latvian and Finnish theatre. I'm sorry, but in my abstract, when I was writing my abstract, maybe I was too bold. I have too wide research plans in mind, so I couldn't do everything, so just a bit. Yes. Okay, so first, the establishment of national theatre was almost a compulsory element in building up national consciousness and later on also the nation state in most of Eastern European countries, but also in Finland, Norway, and Iceland. National theatre meant performances in national languages presented and received by native speakers. Nevertheless, theatre tradition in these countries was already developed in some other languages, mostly in German or Russian, or in Scandinavia, also in Swedish or in Danish. And these older theatre tradition in other languages did not fade after the establishment of local national theatres. So what kind of position these troupes and theatres acquired after the establishment of national theatres and how they work is represented in theatre histories. This is the main core of my research and my paper right now. So I choose three books published in English, all representing national theatre history. The first book is called The Dynamic World of Finnish Theatre. It's written by American-Irish author Steve Wilmer and Finnish author Pirkko Koski. Then second book is Estonian Theatre, written by Jaak Rähesoo, and the third book is Theatre in Latvia, edited by Gunnar Zeltina. So, following the order, I'm starting with the how in Finland the national theatre history is presented, then coming to Estonia, and then to Latvia, where we are right now. So it's interesting that in a certain aspect, all these three books I'm gonna introduce you more thoroughly now, they share certain similar elements. All these authors start the presentation of national theatre histories with a statement about strong folkloristic roots that can be traced also to theatre. And the second point is that they also acknowledge their foreign influences, but also mostly they tackle the foreign influences before they start telling story of national theatre history. So the foreign background is given rather shortly and in the beginning of this national things. So the book about Finnish theatre is called The Dynamic World of Finnish Theatre. I have to inform that nowadays Finland is a bilingual country with two official languages, Finnish and Swedish, and even the Swedish-speaking population consists of 60% of inhabitants. Anyway, Wilmer and Koski start the introduction of Finnish theatre with a chapter about touring companies and indigenous drama. And with the word indigenous, they have in mind drama written in or about Finland and without clear references to language. For example, the first indigenous opera was performed in Swedish. In the next chapter, titled Swedish Theatre or New Theatre, they described how Swedish-speaking theatre was trying to represent and also emerge Finnish-speaking population. For example, the first professional production of a play in Finnish, Aleksis Kivi's Lea, was performed just 1 year after Latvian first national production. It was in 1869 with a Swedish-Norwegian actress who could not understand Finnish otherwise, but who was playing in the leading role. So you could see that the language issues were not so sharp or clear in Finnish theatre history. And there is also the third chapter about Russian theatre, but afterwards no language issues are stressed. Later on in this book, authors also make several important statements concerning this my topic. For example, they state, in bilingual Finland, the Swedish theatre in Helsinki was a peripheral area of Swedish theatre professionalism, and the local Swedish dialect was not heard on that stage. The theatre was conquered by local actors as late as 1916. The Russian theatre was a part of the Russian theatre system and did not influence local Finnish development or, indeed, represent local languages. And they summarize the current situation as follows. Finnish-speaking and Swedish-speaking theatres in Finland have no principal differences in repertoire or working methods. So, and this statement is also supported by the undifferentiated presentation of theatre institutions and stage directors, convincing the reader that really language does not matter in bilingual Finland. So I found this Finnish example rather interesting because I think that this is a little bit different in Estonia and Latvia. Jaak Rähesoo in his book gives a short overview of the history of local German theatres in 3 pages. I want to stress that rather short introduction. Later on, it is mentioned that German theatre was functioning half-heartedly in independent Estonia until Hitler called the Baltic Germans back to their homeland in 1939. And this was also the end of a German-speaking theatre in Estonia. The first Russian theatre in Estonia was established in 1948, and after presenting that fact, no word about Russian-speaking theatre is mentioned by Rähesoo in his historical survey. Later on, when there is an introduction of different theater institutions under the title the Russian Drama Theater, also Russian-speaking amateur and semi-amateur troupes are introduced. But Rahasoo stressed that Tallinn was for the most of Russian actors and directors a launching pad for Moscow and Leningrad. Professional contacts between the Russian drama theater and Estonian-speaking theaters or theater makers have been quite random. Thus, one can paraphrase Wilmer and Koski stating that Russian theater in Estonia is a peripheral area of Russian theater professionalism or a part of Russian theater system. And also I want to stress that, of course, there has been some occasions when Russian actors are performing in Estonian productions and other way around. But, for example, rather interesting for me is that there are hardly Russian characters presented in Estonian plays or productions. And especially after the Bronze Soldier events or the clash between Estonians and Russians in Estonia, I think that Estonian television channels, and especially Estonian soap operas, have been really trying to work in the direction of integration. And now we can quite often see Russians, the characters in Estonian soap operas. And we have, like right now, a lot of domestic soap operas. And you could see that this is a point of ideology that is really missing on the theater scene. Okay, so now to Latvia. Actually, I found the situation in Latvian theater history extremely interesting and was regretting that I knew so little about Latvian theater history earlier. Okay, following Gunnar Zeltina's line, Gunnar Zeltina has written the introductory part to the book Theater in Latvia. And also she starts with the era of touring companies and states that the permanent German theater was established in 1782, where only a few of the musicians were of Latvian descent. So really it was also not part of Latvian theater system. The dominance of German theater culture was initially shaken by the establishment of Russian theaters in Daugavpils in 1850s and in Riga in 1883. So when in Estonia the first professional Russian-speaking theater was established in 1948. So it's much later, and I think that it also makes maybe a big difference. But after the birth of Latvian theatre in 1868, the activities of German and Russian theatres are mentioned only in the cases when they intersect with Latvian theatre. So I have also examples, but I don't have time to give them. Maybe only Russian director Sergei Radlov was mentioned, who was mentioned as a reinforcer of theatre culture in Latvia after the Second World War. Later on, Zeltin admits that during the years of Latvian independence between the two world wars, the Daugavpils Russian theatre became almost a persecuted underground theatre, thus also becoming an entirely amateur group. So I titled this language battle in Daugavpils, because I think that what happened in Daugavpils, it was really some kind of language struggle or language battle between Russian and Latvian language. So Zeltina first mentioned that this Russian troupe was persecuted. Then she also tells the story that during the period 44 until 58, the situation was changed completely, with theatre having only Russian-speaking group. Thus, a true language battle has been going on. And there was no professional theatre activities in Daugavpils in 63 until 88, and after that, a theatre with two troupes were re-established again. The Riga Russian theatre has had more stable grounds and has also initiated collaboration of Latvian actors since 2000. The theatre has been, nevertheless, the theatre has been experiencing a continuous change of chief artistic directors. And also I think that this is exactly the same situation in Estonia, that the Russian theatre in Tallinn has been rather unstable aesthetic and organizational crowd. So in general, I can state that Russian theatre seems to have more firm position in Latvia than in Estonia, but continuous change of artistic directors and unstable artistic program signal loss of identity of the theatre art in Russian. I think that this, the battery is... Okay, yeah. Anyway, when I was reading these 3 volumes, then I was wondering that since many Estonian and Latvian actors and stage directors were trained and taught, because it's saying that you should plug in the wire. Okay, so this is your job. That since Estonian and Latvian actors and directors were trained and taught either by German colleagues or they at home or abroad in the end of 19th century, one might wonder how different this Estonian or Latvian speaking theatre was from its German counterpart. And other way around, there was a really significant difference between Russian and Latvian speaking theatres in Latvia after the Second World War, where actually the training system and the theatre system was more or less the same. So this is also a question to you to discuss later on. But anyway, when reading these kind of presentations, I have been also wondering that what kind of relationship have been during the recent years between different theatres using different stage language. And maybe the authors are really undermining the influence and the collaboration between these Russian and Estonian and Russian and Latvian speaking groups. Or other way around, or other hesitation was that maybe there was really no contact or no cultural context, but the authors were trying to be politically correct and also gave the space for also representing and introducing the local Russian theatres and also trying to lift up the aesthetic and artistic merit. So I don't know, but anyway, this is the questions I would like to find answer later on. But anyway, I think that these language issues have become very important lately because internationalization of theatre scene has brought language issues to the fore again, especially in contemporary dance and music theatre, but to a certain extent also in drama. So mostly internationalization results in wider use of English, yeah, perfect, or combination of different languages, like Lule was also introducing. There are just some examples. For example, in the Soviet Estonia, all music productions, for my big surprise, were performed in Estonian. Nowadays, of course, the works are performed in the original languages. Mostly the stage directors come from other countries, and mostly also leading singers are also inviting from other countries. Almost a similar situation is, I think, in the field of contemporary dance, where is also often language is used. And since the audience of contemporary dance in Estonia and also I expect in Latvia and Lithuania is so small that these dancers and choreographers, they travel around quite a lot. So most of these productions, they are either presented or prepared, or the performers are prepared to present these works also in English. So this kind of at least bilingual system can be detected. But also I think that we should also tackle the question of different sub-languages and dialects used in theatre, because until the last quarter of 19th century, there was 2 written languages in Estonia, Southern Estonian language and Northern Estonian language. And because of the achieving national unity and coherence, the Southern Estonian language was abandoned because of the merits of national unity. But after Estonia became independent again in 1991, especially Southern Estonian identity and Southern Estonian dialects became especially prominent and strong. Now we have like several theatre institutions that are producing also productions in Southern Estonian dialect. And these production has been met with great enthusiasm. But also I want to stress that also national identity is just a construction, and this construction is often made in the name of abolishing or abandoning the local identities. I think now when the national identity is more firm ground, based on or protected by the nation state, I also think that local identities are presented more boldly and more often on Estonian and also in Finnish stages. And there has been also research done in how dialects are used in literature and in theatre, and mostly they are used in the context of this kind of canonical language or written language, and of standard language. Yeah, yes, I know. I'm fully aware of the time limits. As a specific character of character which often serves as a comic effect. So often the dialect is used for comic purposes. The change that has been taken in an Estonian theatre is that now also full productions in dialects have been performed, and not only comedies but also drama and tragedies. So I think that it's also very important that the dialect has wider functions and use on stage, not only serving the comic effect. And of course, another issue you're probably also familiar with is that theatre audience is quite sensitive towards low language on stage or swearing and so on. But as many contemporary artists state, also I would like to finish my presentation of the citation by Finnish director Pekka Milanov, who has been stating that it has been necessary to find a language with which to take the new situation under control. And also I think this statement partly explains why nowadays you can hear so much low style or obscene language on stage, that it might have also certain this kind of artistic functions and aims. I would finish here, so thank you.
Thank you very much. Now we proceed to the last paper of this final session, that is by Lithuanian researcher Loreta Jakonitė, and she is from the Institute of Lithuanian Literature and Folklore in Vilnius, a senior researcher of that institute and the head of the Department of Contemporary Literature. Now the title of her paper is Facing a Chinese Granddaughter, the Issue of Cultural Diversity in Contemporary Lithuanian Literary Field. Please. Here you go.
Thank you very much. I understand that my task is to finish as quickly as possible, so I'll try. And I will focus on literature, but I'd like to begin with a quote that comes from life, so to say, and illustrates new social and cultural changes that the Baltics are facing nowadays. So here is this quote. My colleague, whose daughter started her primary school this year, one day said to me, "You know, my daughter has a Chinese classmate," and added, "but only one." So, end of quote. So her voice was quite complex, a bit of surprise, a bit of worry, a bit of curiosity. And 2 years ago, our sociologist conducted a special research about the Chinese diaspora in Lithuania. this modern Chinese diaspora, immigrants in the post-Soviet Lithuania, and revealed that one half of the locals, that's Lithuanians, are quite suspicious towards the Western minorities in our country, and actually do not believe in their positive contribution to the Lithuanian society. And this research also discovered an important role of the media, that these groups have almost no direct contacts, and the image of Asian people strongly depends upon their image in the mass media and the public discourse. And of course, literature might be an important part of this public discourse. And in recent years, several authors have published stories on the experience of meeting people of non-Western cultures, and again reinitiated this discourse about cultural diversity in the local literary field. Quite surprisingly, several China-themed books of different genres appeared at a short interval. I will show this list. There are 4 books. In 2011, Breathing of the Dragon travel writing book appeared. Then Vaiva Grainytė published her Diaries of Beijing essay book, and 2 novels. In 2012, Audronė Urbonaitė Sugar-Coated Fish, and Undinės Radzevičiūtės Fishes and Dragons, 2013. So next I'll just show those covers. It seems that interest in China has dramatically increased in our literary field, and suddenly the audience got a relatively large narrative. So my goal was to examine these cross-cultural perceptions thematized in these works, and also the reaction to that these books raised in the literary field. And I was interested in the ways our literature interprets encounters between the Lithuanians and the Chinese, and how it contributes to that public discourse on cultural diversity. There is no time for the details, therefore I will present only main theses and directions of these interpretations. The first book you see is the travel book, Breathing of the Dragon, and this book is promoted by its authors and publishers as the first book written in Lithuanian, presenting such a broad and even groundbreaking knowledge about Asian countries. It is not the first, it's not true, but the authors promote this book like that, in this way. And in fact, however, this narrative is very categorical and contains many traditional cross-cultural stereotypes, both towards the West and the East. For instance, that all the Western doctors are stupid, it's author's words, and far worse than the ancient Chinese medicine. Also, the authors reproach Lithuanians for being narrow-minded towards Asia as a barbaric nation, but when authors, for example, travel by bus in China, they try to keep away from the Chinese by all means, because the locals, as they say, are dirty and lack civilized manners, can vomit over their fellow passengers without a second thought. So the authors traditionally praised ancient astrology and medicine, but are very skeptical about modern Chinese life, and are tended towards quick generalizations. For instance, that the youngest Chinese have no values at all. The narrator of next book, Vaiva Grainytės Diaries of Beijing, is far more open-minded, and the narrative in the form of a diary presents the experience of a young 28-year-old Lithuanian woman who spent a year in China studying the Chinese language and traveling around the country. As for the issue of cultural diversity, the main aspects are these. First, she doesn't feel any cultural variety at home and longs very much for new challenges and exotic experience in her life. Before her trip, Vaiva has just few frightening or negative details knows about China, that is strong pollution, hot weather, and very strange food. But she is a very conscious traveler. And while being in China, she observes the local culture and multicultural, multiracial dormitory residence with anthropological passion. Her attitude towards China and different people is quite ambiguous. To put it a bit simplified, she likes local nature, ancient heritage, and modern high art, but sometimes struggles with everyday habits. In contrast to the previously mentioned book, Greinite makes no open judgment and doesn't embed any hierarchies. I quote, "I like everyone and nobody, everything and nothing. I nor love it, neither hate it," end of quote. On the other hand, she has no deep contacts with other people. And this is the prevailing idea of all these books. Her best friend is still European, a Czech girl. Communication with classmates are limited to shallow conversations like, "How are you? That's cool," and like that. And instead of active interaction, this Lithuanian woman chooses a position of a very passive observer, curious but passive. And about the reaction of the literary field towards this book. The initial edition of Greinite's book had just 800 copies, but as the book went on sale, there was a demand for more, and now we have 4 editions of Diary of Beijing and an audio book as well. The work was awarded a prize for the best debut prose of the year and also has been nominated for the Book of the Year 2012. According to the reviewers, the book gives a totally different perspective on China, though none of them specify what they mean by different, but just claim that you will learn a lot about how it feels to live in China as a foreigner, end of quote. Greinite's young woman longs for some exotic, while the main character of next book, the novel by Audronė Urbonaitė, Sugar-Coated Fish, the main character of this novel, an aging Lithuanian female journalist, clashes with a different culture against her will. Having graduated from Cambridge, her son brings home to Vilnius his Chinese daughter. And this situation turns this woman's life upside down, especially when the teenager granddaughter unexpectedly disappears. And to familiarize herself with the Chinese culture, Chinese life style, the journalist starts visiting local Chinese restaurants and shops, starts talking to the immigrants, and finally she travels to China to look for the daughter-in-law. This is quite a complex plot. And on the one hand, different cultures obviously compete with each other in this novel. The Chinese invade, this is the word of the novel, invade Lithuania, and in the phantasmagorical end, become the majority in Lithuania. But the interaction between Lithuanians and the Chinese is depicted in a satirical voice. The story includes many comical details, humor, and self-irony. This woman finds the Chinese style of life, way of life, quite different to what she has imagined. And from the Asian point, which is also presented in the book, point of view, many of her habits are considered funny in the laborious and aim-driven China. Employing this novel, is new at least for Lithuanian literature plot, the author also adds an important idea to the interpretation of multicultural society, that for national majorities to deal with the challenges of diversity, it is necessary to recognize that majority itself is eternally diverse. And Urbonaitė's characters, which initially identify themselves as pure Lithuanians, appear to be true ethnic mixtures. This novel actually isn't praised by critics. Nevertheless, it represents Lithuanian prose abroad. It's translated into other languages, and also it was presented in a large Asian book fair, where it was advertised as a book marking cultural arrogance. And the novel by Radzevičiūtė, the last one, Fishes and Dragons, which was published in 2013, as its title suggests, focuses on the interaction between the West, the fish as the symbol of Christianity, and the East, dragons. And it tells 2 stories in parallel. The first one depicts the 18th century China, where a European painter, Italian monk, tries unsuccessfully to introduce Christianity to China. And the second line presents everyday dialogues among 4 women of one family, a grandmother, her daughter, and 2 granddaughters that live in an unnamed 21st century European city with a communist or Soviet past. So this nowadays plot presents the Europeans and the Chinese as absolutely isolated neighbors. They have no direct contact, and the Chinese characters never talk in this book, and the European family just observes them through the window, again, like Granita's book, only observations. As the narrator puts it, there is Europe at home and China below. The old town accepted Chinatown 15 years ago, end of quote. And in the second plot, the Italian monk finally begins assimilating to the locals. And the Chinese character reminds an ancient tale about a fish that turned into a dragon. And the novel reflects this mutual attraction and repulsion between the East and West, through the idea, though the idea prevails that dragons are ready to swallow up fishes at the first opportunity. And Mother Nora, from this modern plot line, a European character claims, we should wait with that idea of the united world, end of quote. This novel also was nominated for the Book of the Year 2012. It should be for 13. Literary critics consider this work one of the best Lithuanian novels of the last decade, both for its sophisticated style and quite problematic interpretation of cultural interactions. According to scholars of different national literatures, there are quite many researchers on this topic. Fictional representations of the Chinese and Western literatures has been polarized between two extremes, the negative and the positive. The British literary scholars wondered recently that the British Chinese community is the fastest growing non-European ethnic group in Britain, but long-established stereotypes of China and Chinese are surprisingly widespread and perpetuated by the media and fiction. We could sum up that the recent Lithuanian literature in Lithuania introduced new plots with Chinese settings, Chinese exotic characters, and tried to reinterpret this topic of cultural diversity. And the reception proves the demand for this topic, though it is hard to explain why this topic getting so much attention. It seems that Lithuanian literature is fascinating with the Chinese nature and ancient heritage, but finds it difficult to interact in everyday life. It imagines China and the Chinese as a source of interest and danger at the same time. None of the books I mentioned presents a harmonious or equal relationship. People of different cultures in these books meet physically, but not mentally. Thank you. So.
Thank you very much. Yes, we are now in time. We will have 10 minutes for questions, discussion. Now I would like to ask Loretta, myself, just a curiosity. You said that the novel was at the big Asian book fair. Was it? Has it been translated already into English, or what was? Yeah.
It has been translated, and it was presented as a very open-minded book. The author said that she, amongst the Europeans, laziness and so on, and is fascinated by Asians. So, in general, this author's position is based on scandal, and she's a Lithuanian journalist in real life too, and she just likes these strong oppositions. So when she went to Taipei, she presented her book this way, and she has her web pages, and this narrative goes on and go on. So.
Yes, please. Now you from the public, and please ask questions. These four authors of the papers. Yes, please, Benedict. Okay.
I have a rather simple question. So actually, it was this project, which I understand is a project of Tito Yasov going to. You were actually talking about Tito
years ago into Hamburg to stage this Andrei Ivanov's plays, and inviting to his own theater Sebastian Niebling, who is kind of bringing Europe or to represent the darker side of Europe or whatever. Journey to the heart of darkness. Is it a deliberate, really deliberate project of No 99? And was it advertised like in that way that it's kind of an interchange? And what was the public reaction? Because I think, let's say, German director was not that sensitive to Estonian language and all these things on stage.
Yes, you asked about Tiit Ojaso's production in Hamburg. Yes. Unfortunately, I know little about this. I had no opportunity to see it, and there is no video. I tried to read some critics, and I understood that this topic, refugees, is European topic, and the theater was interested in collaboration, maybe because of the topic of this book. And Ivanov's book was translated already in German. But unfortunately, I don't know any details about this production. Tiit Ojaso has collaborated with Hamburg Theatre previously as well. So it was a kind of next production, and Ivanov's work was chosen. Yeah.
Nibbling, language on stage, and things like that.
So you want me to respond in general to the production? Because I think that in most of countries that belong to European Union, internationalization and collaboration is almost this kind of must words. I can see that these words are repeated in cultural policy documents everywhere in European Union. So really theatre institutions are forced to do this collaboration. And I think that to a certain extent it's always refreshing. But for example, what has been issue in Estonia about music theatre and also ballet, which consists mostly of foreign dancers, ballet dancers, and even we have a ballet school in Estonia, that when a certain field becomes totally internationalized and there is no space for local artists, that becomes problematic. So lately it was an issue that the old generation of Estonian music directors has retired, and all young opera directors are working abroad, nobody in Estonia. But at the same time, we had last year 2 Estonian operas performed. So things are changing, but anyway, I think that we should be aware of this language issue also, that it has been very important. But also I think that now when Estonians are still a majority in Estonia, that we should also maybe try to make more collaboration with Russian speaking actors and troops, and not only Western, because we are still in the power position in our country, and Russian speaking population is still a minority in our country. So I think that we should initiate the collaboration also with Russian speaking actors and theatre makers.
More interest, yes, please.
I'm not in theater at all. It's just like someone who goes to theater sometimes in Riga. Just 2 short remarks that came to my mind right now. First, you were talking about Russian drama theater in the interwar. And it's interesting because in the 30s it was considered the best Russian theater outside of Russia. So people would come from St. Petersburg. The Riga, the professional drama theater. It was a time when Chekhov was still here, so Mikhail Chekhov. So that's, just, there's actually quite a lot of writings of, I think even Mayakovsky wrote about it when he was here. And that would be the first short remark, maybe interesting for you. And second, something I know just as someone who goes to Latvian opera is that something that I think is beautiful and wonderful. So there's been a lot of Latvian productions with Russian stage artists and opera directors for the new productions. For example, for To Three Oranges last season, a lot of artists from Moscow were.
But excuse me, they were presented in Latvian language?
No, To Three Oranges is Russian. It's
Okay. So when you make a Latvian opera, then produced in Latvia, not just composed or made it so?
I think Karavara, which was a Latvian English production, I think the stage, I need to know, so I think someone was also from Moscow. That was a Latvian original production. Yeah, I think that was just shortly. I thought maybe it would be interesting.
Yes, are there more questions? Yes. If not, then I think it's time to finish, and then, or maybe somebody still wants to say a few words. Yes, Benedict will say.
Just many thanks again for this nice session and very good speakers. And now we have finished the academic part of the first day. If we are organized and go downstairs all together, we would most probably